Hey everybody, Matthias here with the Little Mo Club. Today we're back with another interview. Today I'm going to have the pleasure of interviewing the founder of Parenting Aces. So let me introduce to you guys Lisa Stone. Lisa, it's great to finally be able to meet you and have an interview session with you.
Nice to meet you
I
too, Matthias.
Thank you. Um, I haven't had much time doing these interviews, but I have enough to be able to interview tennis players and coaches, but I have never gotten to interview a parent. So I feel like it's very important to get this, like the perspective of the parent when it comes to the game of tennis. So, you know, Parenting Aces is a website that is, as she says, for tennis parents by a tennis parent. So as I was saying, I think it's a really important perspective to get, like the parent's perspective. So thank you very much for joining us today, and without further ado, let's get started. So Lisa, let me start off by asking you, how did you come up with the idea of Parenting Aces?
Well, when my son was the same age as you are right now, he had the goal to play college tennis, and I wanted to help him reach his goal, but I didn't know how to help him. And so I was asking his coaches for advice, and I was going to the governing body and asking for advice, and really couldn't get the information I needed. So I took to the internet, like a lot of people do, and started asking my questions on a Facebook group that was filled with former top junior tennis players. And I was getting some really, really helpful information from them. One of them said, "Hey, Lisa, if you have all these questions, don't you think there are probably other parents out there that have the same questions? Why don't you take all this information and stick it up on a website?" And so I thought, why not? I know how to do that. So I created a website and just started kind of keeping track of my journey with my son through his junior tennis development, writing articles and interviewing different coaches and fitness experts and nutrition experts and mental training experts and manufacturers and all different kinds of people, and started creating all of this content that was out there for anybody to use. It was for free. And about 6 months in, I got asked to host what was then called an online radio show. Now we call them podcasts. And so the Parenting Aces podcast was born shortly after the website started. And we're now in our 10th year. So lots and lots
Wow.
and lots of interviews and articles available for parents out there to find.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
really good. So I was my moving on to the second question that we have. I was going to ask you that we often see, obviously, in these junior tournaments, a lot of parents getting overexcited and sometimes even getting involved in matches with line calls and with refs, and which obviously lets off a lot of pressure on the players and on the kids. What do you think about parents and coaches? Should parents be the coaches? Should they get involved, or should they kind of try to stay out of it as much as they can and just try to be parents and be supportive?
Well, I think that's one of the challenges with our sport is there's not just one way of doing things that's right for every single kid, every single parent, or every single family, right?
Yeah.
So there are people out there who grew up playing tennis, who were really good tennis players themselves, maybe were coaches before they became parents, and now they have a child that's interested in learning the game. And so the logical step would be for that parent to start their kid off and coach them. And sometimes it works out great, sometimes not so great. And, what I tell parents is at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you finish this tennis journey with your relationship with your child in a really good place. That's the most important piece of it, is that the parent and the child still like each other at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And so some kids love having their parents coach them, and it's a great relationship, and they develop well and they thrive in that environment. Other kids, it just doesn't work so well. So I think you really have to look at it on a case by case basis. And really the most important thing is keeping the communication open. So as the young player, it's important that you tell your parents, hey, mom, dad, I love you. You're a great tennis player. You're even a great coach, but it might be better if I have a different coach working with me. And when we go to tennis tournaments, you just be there as my parent, not as my coach.
Yeah, gotcha, gotcha. So, speaking about junior tennis development, more or less kind of going into the question I just asked, sometimes you see with younger kids that the parent starts off as a coach and eventually gets to a point where maybe the parent can't provide as much as a professional coach. So, around what time should you try to, should the kid start transitioning to like a professional coach or like a professional academy?
I think again, it depends on the family situation, right? So every kid's different, every coaching situation's different, every family's financial situation is different, and you really have to do what's right for your child and your family. As the player, if you're, let's say you and at age 14, you feel like, hey, my dad's been a great coach for me all these years, but now I feel like it's really time for me to move into a different coaching situation, then you would have to have that probably kind of difficult conversation with your dad and say,
Mhm.
you've done a great job up till now, but I think for both of us, it would be best if I have a different coach. But there's certain parents that are able to coach their kids all the way through, even throughout a professional career. And for those families, that's awesome if it works out, but it's not the right thing for everybody.
Right. So, how can a non-coach tennis parent help their child improve their game?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. I think the first thing they can do is to get educated, and that's one of the things that Parenting Aces is here to help with. Really providing information so that the parents understand how the various ranking and rating systems work, or how the various tournament structures work. When is it time for my child to play up? When is it time for my child to be traveling and playing, the bigger national events? Or when is it time for my kid to start traveling internationally and playing ITFs and those types of events? But also, really kind of understanding the emotion that's behind watching your child get good at something and compete at a high level, and learning how to manage those emotions when you are watching your child is really the most important thing that parents can do. And it's hard. And I will say that not until my son's sophomore year in college did I get decently good at that. I was terrible at it all through his juniors. And, he would tell me after matches, Mom, I saw you making those spaces, or, I could hear you like
Yeah.
get upset when I would miss an easy ball or whatever. So I think learning how to manage emotion is really important. And as I mentioned before, having that open communication between the parent and the child is also really important, because there are going to be times where, as a junior player, maybe you're kind of getting a little burned out and you might want to have a little break away from your training or take a break from competing. And you have to feel comfortable going to your parent and saying, hey, mom, hey, dad, I need a week off, or I need a month off, or I need to take the summer off and do something different, maybe go away to camp or learn a musical instrument or whatever it is. And as the parent, we have to understand that it doesn't mean that you're walking away from the sport altogether. It just means you need a little break, just like you said. And we have to take you at your word and trust that if tennis is for you and it's what you really want, you'll come back to it, and come back to it ready to work hard and achieve your goals. And if it's not what you choose to do, that's okay too. And a junior tennis player is a human being first and a tennis player second.
Yeah. So moving on to the next one that I have, I was going to ask, what do you think about becoming homeschooled to try to be able to play more tennis? I feel like a lot of kids now and parents are trying to shift more towards the homeschooling to have a more flexible schedule, to be able to travel to national tournaments or to be able to train more hours. What do you think about that, like, transition? Around what age again should they try to do it? Like, if they're too little, would it impact like their more like their social life, like their friends and everything? Around what age do you think would be a good time to make a transition from like maybe normal school to get a little more serious and do something like a homeschool or an online school?
I think for most kids, and again, it depends on the situation, but for most kids, there is a way to stay in traditional school and compete in tennis at the highest level. And in fact, the young man who was a finalist at the Easter Bowl goes to regular school and he plays on his high school tennis team. So there are kids who figure out a way and families who figure out a way to stay in school. I am not a huge fan of homeschooling because of tennis. If there are other reasons that virtual school or homeschool is the right option for your family, maybe financial reasons or time reasons or other things, then that's a decision to be made by the family. But I think in most cases, there is a way to continue in traditional school and continue to compete in tennis and develop to be the highest level player you can be. And in fact, I think it's really important to note that there are some college coaches out there that won't even recruit kids that didn't go to traditional school. That's a requirement for them to look at the kids. So you ask about age. I'll say my son actually did virtual school in 7th and 8th grade. He requested to do that. Where he trained had a group that, trained from noon to 4 every day. And, if he was in regular school, he wasn't able to be in
Right.
that
Yeah.
group. And so we made the decision to homeschool and for that year and a half. But at the end of 8th grade, he said, I'm done. I want to go back to regular school for high school. And we were able to negotiate with our school district so that he could compress his school day. So he would go to school from 7 a.m. to noon, straight through, no breaks. And then at noon, I would pick him up and he would go to the tennis courts. And so it was kind of a best of both worlds situation.
Yeah.
Where it gets tricky, as you mentioned, is when you're traveling a lot for your tennis, and that requires you to miss a Friday or a Monday, or both a Friday and a Monday if you're doing well, or if you're playing ITF tournaments that run from Monday through the weekend, you're missing the whole week of school.
Right.
So if that's the path you're on, then you have to seriously consider looking at a virtual option.
Gotcha. So a lot of younger kids now, I feel like everything is getting the whole tournament scenario is getting a lot more competitive. And kids are starting to compete at a younger age more or less. And so sometimes I'll go to these tournaments and I'll see maybe some 10-year-old kids that are trying to play up and play 14s, or some 12-year-olds that are playing 16s. So there's kind of almost like a shift of kids that are trying to play up, right? And so what do you think like about trying to play up and playing up in a different category against obviously much bigger and stronger kids?
I think it depends on the child, obviously. So again, referencing the Easter Bowl, there was a 10-year-old playing in the 12s in Easter Bowl. That's not unusual, but it's one of our country's largest tournaments and highest level tournaments. And, there was a 10-year-old competing there. And we saw, 13, 14-year-olds competing in the 16s and exactly what you're talking about. I think you have to balance the tournaments you're playing to challenge the player enough so that they're still interested. If they're beating everybody in their age group easily, then it's going to get boring and maybe they're going to consider quitting, which we don't want to happen. So playing up is a nice solution to that. But at the same time, you don't want a child only playing up and not having that pressure of having to compete against people of their own age, because there's a lot different pressure going in when you're supposed to win a match versus when you're the underdog and nobody expects you to win, right?
Right.
And it's important to develop that competitive muscle in both those situations, knowing how to win when you're supposed to and figuring out how to win when nobody expects you to. So I think striking that balance is really important. And then from a physical standpoint, as you mentioned, when you play up, a lot of times you're playing against kids that are bigger and stronger. And is that going to cause physical damage to the younger player? You know, is the ball going to be too fast and too heavy for their muscles and their bone structure to handle that, that extra stress? If
Yeah.
so, then, we don't want anybody getting hurt. We want you to stay healthy and be able to play forever.
So, moving on to another question. There's obviously now there's many indicators in the level of a kid. They have the tennis recruiting, they have the USTA national ranking, the ITF rankings, and newly they added they started implementing more the UTR.
Mhm.
What do you think, like for colleges and just in general, what do you think is the best indicator of a kid's skill? Would it be like tournament results? Would it be like a certain UTR, a certain national ranking? What do you say is the best indicator to see a kid's level?
Well, if you're talking about in terms of college recruiting, I will say I talk to a lot of college coaches, and the first thing they look at is UTR. USTA ranking, we know USTA launched a new platform this year, and there have been a lot of bugs in the platform. So the USTA rankings right now are not very reliable, and I think everybody understands that. So, we're not going to really focus on USTA ranking right now. And tennis recruiting is also a great thing to look at in terms of where you are in your recruiting class. So I think it's really helpful to know, am I top 5 in my recruiting class? Am I in the top 100? And that helps when it's time to start your college recruiting, to know which level of schools you should be targeting, where you have a chance to play and do well. ITF ranking is also very useful for the kids that play ITF tournaments, but we know not everybody does that. And once you get in that ITF circuit, it requires a lot of travel, and like we said, a lot of missed school if you're going to traditional school. So it's not the right choice for everybody. But for the kids that have an ITF ranking, I think it's relatively reliable. Um, but I think UTR kind of is the number that everybody kind of agrees is kind of the go-to right now, because UTR pulls results from USTA tournaments, from ITF tournaments, from men's and women's open events. So it really reflects all of the different levels of tennis that you play.
Right. So that was a great answer. I was going to ask you more. Moving on. Let's say a kid wants to, he's a junior. He's anywhere from 8 to 11, 12 years old. And he's doing pretty good. What would be the best in your experience? What would be the best pathway for him to try to go like pro or maybe get a college scholarship D1? Like, should he try to focus maybe playing more USTAs? Trying to get like just the UTR events? Should he like at 14, 15 start playing like prize money events, um, ITF pro tournaments? Like what would be the best pathway for a really good junior that's 10, 11, 12 that's trying to make it all the way to pro by the time 18, 19, 20? What would be like the best way to go?
I think the key to look at is, are you beating everybody? So this is applicable regardless of what your goals are in tennis and what age you are. So for you, for example, at age 14, if you're playing a sectional event in the 14s, are you winning that event? 9 times out of 10, you're beating all of the other kids in the draw. in which case maybe it's time for you to be playing 16s or 18s. Or if you're 14 and you're winning 18s events, now
Yeah.
maybe it's time to start playing open events and start competing against adults. The ITA summer circuit and the new ITA fall circuit are great ways to kind of test your level against older and bigger players, more experienced players, and see how you can compete against them. But keeping in mind that coming in as a 14-year-old, you're not expected to win. So there's not a whole lot of pressure on you in those situations, which is good, on the one hand, but on the other hand, you also have to continue to test yourself against your peers and make sure you're still able to compete well and beat the kids that are your same age. Um, Again, tennis is so difficult because there's not one good answer to these questions, right? It's different for every situation, for every kid, for every family. And the nice thing is there are so many options out there. So you live in Florida, you have a variety of types of tennis tournaments available to you pretty much every week. Somebody that lives in the Northeast, where it's all indoor tennis for 6 to 9 months of the year because of the weather, may have fewer opportunities to compete in different levels of tournament. So I think you just have to carve your path. I mean, I always kind of default back to Steve Johnson's story. And Stevie was a top junior. He stayed in school. He didn't play the ITF circuit. He grew up and trained in Southern California, wound up going to USC, and he was the winningest college tennis player ever. Won 4 national championships at USC, and didn't take the traditional path to the pros. And then you've got Taylor Fritz, who went on a very different pathway to professional tennis, decided to go straight from juniors to the pros, was playing pro events at age 16, 17, 18. So there are different ways to get there. And then on the girls side, we've got Coco Gauff, we've got Sophia Kenin, neither of whom went to college, but then you've got Danielle Collins, who had an outstanding college tennis career at University of Virginia. So again, there's not one good answer. You really have to look at it on a case by case basis and decide what's best for that player and that family.
Got it. So, as a tennis parent, what would you have done differently? Let's say, just in your experience, to help, like something that you could have, like not could have, but something that you right now reflecting you would have changed or you would have added, just like in your son's junior career. Like, what was something that you didn't do that you maybe wanted to do, or something that you did that you regretted? Like, what would you have done differently?
How long do you have for me to answer this question? Because I could probably talk to you for about 5 hours about all the things I messed up. Um, I think, first of all, I wish I had understood that it was okay for him to take time away from training and time away from competition. I always felt like we were on this tight timeline, and if he missed a day or missed a tournament, it was the end of the world. And you got to get out there every day and play. And even if we're on vacation, you got to go hit for 30 minutes at least, or do your fitness stuff. And I wish I had been more knowledgeable and more relaxed about those things. In terms of the college stuff, I wish I had known more about Division III when he was going through recruiting. I think for a lot of kids, Division I tennis is always like the gold standard. Everybody wants to play D1, but D1 isn't right for everybody. And when we hear D1, we always think of like the big programs. We think of, Florida or UNC or Wake or UCLA or Stanford. And we don't necessarily understand that there are all different levels of Division I college tennis. And the levels that are considered the mid-major schools that are, outside that very top level, it's a different experience at those schools than it is at those big power schools. And it's not always the best experience for somebody. And maybe they would be better off at a Division 3 school where they have more of a balanced life between their tennis and their college experience. So those are two big ones that I wish I had done differently. The other thing is my having control over my body language during my son's tournaments. I wish I had more control as I sat there in the stands watching him compete, and could kind of find that place of zen inside and not get so freaked out over every match, every tournament, every game, every ball, but just relax and enjoy him play. And as I said, I didn't kind of figure that out till he was a sophomore in college, and it was like, now he's playing. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, he's playing for his school, and that's important, but like, whether he wins, whether he loses, it's not going to do anything to determine his pathway in the rest of his life.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are a lot of things I wish I'd done differently. I've written some articles about that actually on parentingaces.com. So
I was also going to ask you, what would you say is the importance of mental strength in the game?
oh,
'Cause-
huge.
yeah.
Huge. I'm not even going to let you finish your question because you're already seeing this at age 14. Like the kids, when you go to a tournament, everybody's good. Everybody's got great strokes. They're fit. They know how to move around the court. But the difference between winning and losing a match is often what's happening between the ears, right? It's the mental piece of it. How well do you recover when you miss an easy shot? Or how well do you handle somebody making a bad call against you? Or how well do you handle being up 5-2 and then losing the set? All of these things are the difference makers, not just in junior tennis, but I mean, we see it at the professional level as well. And I think learning how not to control the emotions, because I don't think that's what you should seek to do, but to understand them, notice them, and manage them properly and appropriately for the moment. So whether that's having your little rituals between points or on the side changes, rituals that you may have before you start a match, or how you evaluate a match once it's over. I think all of those things help make you not just a better tennis player, but a better human.
Right. I was also going to ask you, so obviously you just told us about how important mental strength was, but I think there's three main other aspects, which would be the fitness, the technique, and the tactics.
Yep.
So, how would you rate all four of them? Like, if you had to rate them from most important to least important?
I think technique is first, always. If you don't know how to move properly and make proper contact with the ball, and swing path and all that, then the other three things are irrelevant. You have to know how to hit the ball well. So once the technique is in place, I think that's a tough one between the other three, because I lump them all together. I think the fitness is a piece that needs to be addressed from day one. It's one of those things that we now say, you develop the athlete first and the tennis player second, and developing the athlete is about the fitness side, understanding how to move, and having the stamina to play a 3-hour match, and then have an hour break and play another 3-hour match. That's really important. Tactics, I think, come into play as you get a little older. So for the 10 and unders, it's not so much about the tactics. In the 12 and unders, it becomes a little more important. And then once you're in the 14s, 16s, 18s, tactics are crucial. You have to understand that if I do this with the ball, my opponent's likely to do that. And then I can do this other thing. And then the mental side, I think that has to be, addressed from the get-go, especially if it's an issue with on-court behavior, and sportsmanship. And I lump that into the mental side of the game, like knowing how to act on the court and knowing how to have respect for your opponent and respect for the officials and the tournament desk, and your parents and your coaches. All those things come into play. But it's a progression. It's not that you throw all four of these things at a 6-year-old when they're starting to play the game. At first it's all about fun and you teach proper technique and let them enjoy being out there. And then these other factors start to come into play slowly.
Yeah. So what like if you could give the biggest piece of advice that you probably have from all your years of experience, what would you give as a piece of advice to a junior player watching this video or this interview?
I would say have fun. Tennis is not who you are. It's what one thing that you do. It's a part of your life, but it's not who you are. And to make sure that while it's important to keep working hard at your tennis, if you want to achieve high levels in the sport, it's also important to have some interests outside of your tennis, whether that's your school, which I hope it's your school, playing an instrument, studying a language, travel, reading, gardening, writing, whatever it is that makes you happy. Have something that is outside of your tennis so that when things aren't maybe going as well as you're hoping they'll go with your tennis, that you have something else to do to kind of lift your spirits and distract yourself. I think that's really important.
Yeah, that's great. Another question is, so let's say that a kid, there's many obviously athletes, as you say, that are already athletes and are very talented and can play basically any sport. So let's say there's a kid that plays, he's really competitive in both soccer and tennis, right? He's
Mhm.
10 or 11 years old. At what age would you say that they should have to decide which sport they're going to take more seriously than the other one, and try to pursue that sport and that like the work that goes into that more than, let's say, like if you choose soccer over tennis or you choose tennis over soccer, like at what age should that choice be made?
I think, I mean, and I'm not an expert here, but I read a lot of expert opinions on this stuff because we talk about this a lot. Early specialization in youth sports is kind of a hot topic of conversation. So the consensus is around age 12, 13 is when kids need to specialize. And the ones who specialize younger than that are the ones that tend to be more susceptible to having overuse injuries or even career ending injuries, because I'm sure you've seen this. If you haven't experienced it yourself, maybe you have friends who have. We're seeing injuries occur in young athletes that used to just happen in adults, and it's because our kids are starting to specialize in one sport so young that they're not kind of getting that cross training that takes place when you play a bunch of different sports. When I was a kid a million years ago, there every sport had a season, and so you could play 3 or 4 different sports throughout the year, even in high school. And we saw, kids playing multiple sports in high school and getting recruited to play college sports. They would have to pick one at that point, make a decision. I'm going to college. Which sport am I going to play in college? But nowadays it's happening so young. And so I would say, even if you do make that choice, let's say, using your example of soccer and tennis, let's say you do choose tennis, there's nothing to say that you can't keep playing soccer for fun with your
Yeah.
friends. It just means you're likely not going to be on a travel team and, having that hardcore training that those kids are having. But, hopefully there's some way, some level for you to get involved in the sport and stay involved in the sport as something fun and a distraction away from your tennis.
So, just elaborating a little bit, you were saying that you could still play that second sport for fun. How much time would you say, like a week, that a kid should be playing the uh, the sport that he's been dedicated to and the hardcore training, and how much time a week would he be playing a sport just for fun?
Well, again, relying on the medical people that are way smarter than I am, kind of the rule of thumb is that you should train per week the same number of hours as your age. So for a 14-year-old, 14 hours a week would be spent training and competing in tennis. And any other physical activity you do would be separate from that. So
Okay.
does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
That's not my rule. That's from the experts.
yeah. So, it's been a great interview so far, but I ran out of questions. Do you have anything that you would like to add?
I just want to say thank you for doing the interview, Matthias. It's been a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. And to all the kids participating in Little Mo Club, I'm so glad that this exists for you guys. It's been a weird year, and I'm glad that the Little Mo organization has figured out a way to keep all of you connected to one another, because the friendships that you make through tennis are going to carry you throughout your life. I'm an old woman now and have lots of friends still as an adult that I used to play tennis with when I was your age, Matthias. And my favorite story is my dad, who's 83 years old, still plays singles with a man that he has been playing against since they were in the 11 and unders.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and they played on the same college team together, and they've continued to be friends all these years, and they continue to play tennis. So tennis is such a great sport for that. And no matter how far you take your tennis, whether it's to play on your middle or high school team, to play in college, to play professionally, or just to play for fun in your neighborhood or with your family, it's a great sport. And it's something that you can do your whole life. So
Yeah.
thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's been a great pleasure. If you guys want to check more about Lisa, make sure to head on over to her website, parentingaces.com. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this interview. So thank you guys for watching and have a good one.